Biomed, Nexus Daily Updates, your essential biotech, medtech, and pharma recap. No noise, just what matters. TLDR Pfizer and Valneva's Lyme disease vaccine showed 73% efficacy in Phase 3, but missed its primary statistical endpoint due to lower-than-expected case counts. Both companies plan to file for approval anyway. Valneva stock cratered over 35%. Apogee Therapeutics, APGE, reported 52-week maintenance data for Zumilokibart in moderate to severe eczema, showing 85% of patients maintained response with dosing just twice a year. That directly challenges Dupixent's every 2-week regimen. Insmed, INSM, posted positive Phase 3b ENCORE results for ARIKAYCE in newly diagnosed MAC lung disease, fulfilling an FDA post-marketing requirement and setting up a supplemental approval filing in H2 2026. Executive Takeaway Monday delivered a study in contrasts. Pfizer and Valneva's Lyme disease vaccine showed meaningful clinical efficacy at 73%, but a lower-than-expected case count during the study period meant it couldn't clear the pre-specified statistical confidence interval. The companies are filing for approval regardless, and the regulatory question now becomes whether the FDA treats this as a math problem or a science problem. The vaccine works, the trial just didn't accrue enough events to prove it with the statistical rigor regulators typically require. In immunology, Apogee quietly dropped one of the most commercially compelling data packages of the month. Zumilokibart maintained eczema responses for a full year with injections every 3 to 6 months. In a world where Dupixent patients inject every 2 weeks and Ebglyss patients inject monthly, a twice-a-year option rewrites the convenience equation entirely. Meanwhile, Insmed checked a critical box for ARIKAYCE with positive ENCORE data in frontline MAC lung disease, clearing the path to expand from refractory to newly diagnosed patients. Read full analysis. What to watch. Pfizer, Valneva. Regulatory strategy. The companies plan to file for US and EU approval despite the primary endpoint miss. Watch for an FDA advisory committee meeting, which is highly likely given the statistical shortfall. Analysts note that HHS Secretary Kennedy has highlighted the need for Lyme treatments, which could translate into a sympathetic regulatory reception. Apogee Phase 3 timing, Zumilokibart's apex. Phase 2 data is being presented at the AAD annual meeting. The Phase 3 trial design and timeline will be the next major catalyst to watch. Rocket Pharma, Friday, March 28th. Kresladi PDUFA for LADI gene therapy is just days away. ACC 26, March 28 to 30. The American College of Cardiology meeting in New Orleans kicks off this weekend. Orforglipron, April 10th. Lilly's oral GLP-1 target action date approaches. Today's top story: Pfizer's Lyme vaccine works. The trial didn't prove it enough. What happened? Pfizer, PFE, and Valneva, VALN, reported results from the Phase 3 VALOR trial of their 6-valent Lyme disease vaccine, VLA15, in approximately 9,400 individuals aged 5 and older. The data: the vaccine demonstrated 73.2% efficacy at preventing Lyme disease 28 days after the 4th dose. However, because fewer Lyme cases than expected accrued during the study period, the lower bound of the 95% confidence interval was 15.8%, falling below the required 20% statistical threshold. Therefore, the primary endpoint was not met. The context: this trial has a rocky history. In 2023, Pfizer and Valneva had to drop roughly half of the enrolled participants, from 18,000 to 9,400, after good clinical practice violations were discovered at sites run by a third-party operator. That reduction directly contributed to the underpowered statistical result. No safety concerns were observed. The regulatory gamble. Both companies are planning to file for approval anyway, pointing to a second pre-specified analysis where efficacy was 74.8% one day after the fourth dose, with the confidence interval just clearing the 20% threshold. Pfizer's chief vaccines officer called the 70% plus efficacy highly encouraging. Executive impact: Valneva stock dropped over 35% on Monday. Pfizer was largely unaffected. The regulatory path is genuinely uncertain. While the current administration has expressed a clear interest in addressing Lyme disease, the commercial reality remains difficult. RBC estimates peak annual sales at only $525 million, noting historical demand for a Lyme vaccine has been tepid at best. GSK famously withdrew Lymerix in 2002 due to poor sales. Moderna also has 2 competing mRNA-based Lyme candidates in mid-stage testing. Clinical and research updates: Apogee's twice-a-year eczema shot rewrites the convenience equation. What happened? Apogee Therapeutics, APGE, reported 52-week maintenance data from Part A of the Phase 2 APEX trial evaluating Zumilokibart, APG777, a potential best-in-class anti-IL-13 antibody in moderate to severe atopic dermatitis. The numbers: among week 16 responders, 75% of patients dosed every 3 months maintained EASI-75 response at 1 year. Even more striking, 85% of patients dosed every 6 months, just 2 injections per year, maintained the same level of response. Executive impact: this is the exact dosing convenience story the massive immunology market has been waiting for. Dupixent requires injections every 2 weeks. Ebglyss is monthly. A twice-a-year option with biologic-caliber maintenance efficacy fundamentally changes the treatment calculus for patients and prescribers. For Sanofi, Regeneron, Dupixent, and Lilly, Ebglyss, this is a long-term competitive threat that just became highly credible. Insmed clears a critical post-marketing hurdle for ARIKAYCE. What happened? Insmed, INSM, reported positive top-line results from the Phase 3b ENCORE study of ARIKAYCE in patients with newly diagnosed or recurrent MAC lung disease who had not previously received antibiotics. The data: the trial met its primary endpoint, showing a statistically significant improvement in respiratory symptom scores at month 13. All secondary endpoints were also met. Executive impact: this data fulfills an FDA post-marketing requirement that was a strict condition of ARIKAYCE's original accelerated approval for refractory MAC lung disease. Insmed plans to file for supplemental U.S. approval and Japanese label expansion in H2 2026. ARIKAYCE generated $434 million in 2025 revenue and is guided for $450–470 in 2026. Expanding into frontline MAC could meaningfully steepen that revenue trajectory. Read Full Analysis Biomed Nexus Pro Institutional Intelligence Briefing. Today's Pro Brief: the Lyme vaccine regulatory math. Why filing after a primary endpoint miss is not unprecedented, and what FDA advisory committee dynamics could look like under current leadership. Apogee's threat to the IL-13 franchise, where Zumilokibart fits versus Dupixent, and Ebglyss on efficacy, dosing, and market positioning. Insmed's dual asset story: what frontline MAC approval means for the broader brensocatib launch narrative. Upgrade to Pro today. Read Full article selective 2026 sponsorship placements are available. Reply directly to discuss a partnership or submit an inquiry here.